Trapped Games, Metroid, Other M. Released for the Wii in August of 2010, taking place between the events of Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion. This game sees Samus answering a distress call to a so-called bottle ship. She finds the crew is nowhere to be found, but there is a squad of Galactic Federation soldiers who also answered the distress call. Samus will work with this squad to determine what exactly happened on this ship. Over the course of the game, there are reveals that are clearly meant to be shocking, like that this bottle ship was primarily researching biological weapons, one of which happened to be Metroid's, shocker of shockers. Or that one of the Galactic Federation soldiers has their own agenda. The fact that Samus is interacting with a cast of characters does set this apart from other Metroid games, and in fact, the presence of these other characters does affect elements of gameplay, as Samus agrees to take orders from the CO of the squad.
Samus, I'm authorizing missile use!
Meaning this is not a Metroidvania, this is a much more guided experience than you're used to in most Metroids. Taking orders from the CO also limits what equipment you are able to use, as this takes place after Super Metroid, and Samus has all the equipment she gained in that game. But the commanding officer here will not allow you to use any of that equipment right at the beginning of the game. As you go to different areas of the bottle ship, he slowly allows you to use more of your equipment, meaning you won't gather power-ups in different areas. Rather, you will encounter a situation you have no way to deal with, and then you'll get a message saying it's okay to use your missiles now. The Wave Beam. You can put the Varia suit on, and frequently you'll have to go through areas where you need an item before you actually get to use that item, which can get frustrating to say the least. And it's not just the way in which you gain access to your equipment in this game that is different. Enemies do not drop health or ammo pickups at all. Instead, if you're low on ammo or health, you need to stand still, take the Wiimote, and point it upwards. Samus will then recharge. Doing this in the middle of combat can be difficult, to say the very least. And that isn't the only eccentricity of combat in this game. As while this is a third-person 3D game, you don't actually have an analog stick while playing. You hold the Wiimote sideways, and when doing so, you effectively have an old-school NES controller, so you can move around, jump and shoot. But for the most part, you can't really do any aiming yourself. The game will simply auto-target the nearest enemy, and while moving around and jumping, you can't actually fire a missile. To fire a missile, you need to point the Wiimote at the screen. This will switch the game to a first-person view, in which you can't move or jump, but you can now target your shots and fire missiles. And doing this can be more than somewhat awkward, and generally bosses and even bigger enemies will have a kind of stunned state that lets you know it's time to point the Wiimote at the screen and fire a missile. Trying to fire a missile outside of these brief windows will usually go poorly for you. Although not everything with the combat is as awkward as firing a missile, as this game did add a dodge mechanic that has you time button presses just at the moment of attack to avoid them, and in certain situations you could jump onto enemies and blast them with a charge shot. In some cases, you actually got to do that in order to perform a bit of an execution on certain enemies. There is, however, one element of gameplay that has no redeeming quality to it. At certain points in the game, usually after a cutscene or after a boss fight, you are forced into a first-person perspective. You now need to find a very specific point somewhere around Samus to scan in order to progress. And you can have Samus look all around her in 360 degrees. But, to progress, there is only one very exact point that you need to scan so you can move on. There were times playing this where I literally was stuck for over 10 minutes trying to find where I just needed to point the cursor. This is a situation where after a certain amount of time, the game should kind of give you a little hint. But so far as I can tell, the game does not do that. If I were to remove any one thing from this game, it would be these scanning sections. As stated, these sections usually come after a cutscene, and cutscenes in this game are a mixed bag, as they do give a rare opportunity for Samus to actually interact with other people, and the various soldiers all have their own personalities. They aren't necessarily deep, but they do stand out from one another. Samus, on the other hand, doesn't have much personality. No matter the situation, she only speaks in a monotone. Even when things are falling apart around her and things are clearly going bad on the bottle ship, she's speaking in that monotone. I'm not sure exactly what the intent was with this, as it seems like a very strange direction to take her character. As in most Metroid games, Samus is alone, so we don't really get a chance to know her as a character. In this game, we had a great chance to get to know her as a character, and they chose to squander that chance. So how likely is it that we ever see the other M re-released? Honestly, it's not very likely for a number of reasons. There are issues with translating some of the Wiimote controls, though honestly I think in this case most of those could be overcome fairly easily. The bigger issue is that this was a rather controversial addition to the Metroid series, as it made the experience far more linear than what one is used to in a Metroid game, which was an idea played with in Metroid Fusion, but this game took it to an even further extreme. And the transition from a series associated with open exploration to an experience being almost entirely on rails was something of a gamble that simply didn't pay off, at least not in the minds of the audience. And the other issue was the very vocal group of fans online that did not care for the portrayal of Samus in this game. Their exact issues are a bit muddled, to say the least. And it is odd, as this is a game that clearly has a disconnect between reviewers at the time and the actual audience, as review scores for the other M were actually quite positive. But sales figures were seen as a disappointment by Nintendo. But the reason for those sales figures is a little harder to pin down. Some people would blame the people complaining about Samus Online, but this was a game released fairly late in the Wii's life cycle, and as much excitement and sales as the Wii got initially, by 2010, a lot of that had cooled down. But either way, Nintendo has stated that the other M was a disappointment, so the likelihood of it ever seeing the light of day again are slim to none. Which is a shame, as while it may have been a controversial entry into the Metroid series, it's not one that really deserves to be forgotten. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.